Today we are talking with author, sacred artist, and earth mystic Joanna Powell Colbert. Joanna, let's get personal. How did you get your start in the tarot?
I first picked up the Rider-Waite-Smith tarot deck in about 1970. And I was 18 years old and I was in my first year of college. And I was just fascinated with it. And what I remember about that first year is that almost every reading that I did for myself or for other people, which of course involved looking at the little white book, right? Looking up the meanings like we always do when we start. And there weren't very many books back then. Like that was like pre-Mary Greer and pre-Rachel Pollack. But every time I would do a reading, the Nine of Swords would turn up. And I could not figure out what that was about or what it meant, had no idea. And at the beginning of the following summer, so I had been playing with the cards for maybe 9 months, and summer came along, and one of my friends from high school was killed in a freak accident. And then 3 months later, at the end of summer, my high school boyfriend was also killed by a drunk driver. And those two boys had been friends. And so to me, the Nine of Swords with inconsolable grief, it scared me and shocked me so much that I put the cards away. And after searching, remember I was only 18 years old and fairly naive, and in Orange County, California, very conservative place. After about a year of deeply searching and trying all kinds of different things, I ended up as a born-again Christian. And because I wanted to know why my friends died. I wanted to know what the meaning of life was and why they had to die. And it was like the first trauma I had ever had in my entire life. And I stayed in the church for about 10 years, most of the 70s. And as part of that, I burned my deck. I burned the deck I had. And I completely turned away from it because that's what I was taught. And then in the late 70s, I began to see the cracks in what I was being taught and began to see that this was not going to work for me, and ended up, this is a much longer story, so this is the zip version, but I ended up leaving the church and moving to the San Francisco Bay Area. And that was right when the Mother Peace deck came out. And so I read about it in the local paper. I drove to Berkeley to get myself a copy, and I started working with the Mother Peace deck, and that's partly how I was introduced to goddess spirituality. And so I came back to tarot through the Mother Peace in the early 80s. I was studying Rider-Waite-Smith and Mother Peace at the same time, and went on from there. So the Mother Peace was my deck of choice for many, many years, but I used a lot of other decks as well. And then it was towards the late 90s that I was wandering around the island where I was living, thinking, how can I put together, if I made my own deck, what could I do to bring something new to the conversation? Because at that point I was known for like goddess portraits and goddess teachings, and there were already a number of really wonderful goddess decks out on the market, and I didn't think I could contribute anything new to that conversation. And so as I was wandering around, I was like, wow, I could bring my intense love for the natural world and what I've been learning about being in relationship with your own specific place. I could bring that to the tarot and marry those two things, and that would be awesome. And that was kind of the birth of the Gaian tarot.
That is an incredible personal tarot journey, Joanna. Could you please elaborate on that experience of going from evangelical Christianity to goddess-centered spirituality?
So we're talking late 70s now, and I was married and had 2 little boys. I was being a good Christian wife and mother. I belonged to a church that didn't want you to even like watch television or go to movies or get any outside input. So as a stay-at-home mom, I didn't get a lot more input. And then I went to work, and I went to work because we needed the money. And it was actually kind of a shameful thing that I went out to work. It was like my husband didn't make enough to support us, and that was a shameful thing. But going out to work is what really shifted my life, because I went to work for a graphic design company, and there were a number of people there that were from Berkeley, and so they looked very out of the ordinary. they out of the ordinary. And it turned out that a couple of them were lesbians, and I had been taught that, of course, that gay and lesbian people were horrible and terrible, and all the horrible things that you're taught about them when you're in that kind of a church. And over the months, and then it turned into years that I worked with them, I found out that they were like lovely, the most wonderful people ever, and that they were funny, they were wise, they were fantastic. And so all of my suppositions about what I had been learning in church started to crack. And then there was another incident where my husband challenged the authority of the church and was nearly kicked out. And I remember having this revelation that the church was not about love, it was about power. It was about having power over people's lives. And I'm talking about that specific church at that particular time. I know that's not everyone's experience, but it was mine. And then I started like sneaking into the local community college to read copies of Ms. Magazine, because I wasn't allowed to read them. I wasn't allowed to take them home, but I would sneak into the library, and it was started raising my feminist consciousness. And then one day I picked up the book From Housewife to Heretic by Sonia Johnson. And she was the woman who was excommunicated from the Mormon Church for supporting the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment. I know I'm really dating myself now, but that book gave me the concept of patriarchy, and her experience was similar enough to mine for me to be able to really kind of understand in that context of what had been happening. And there was a tiny footnote towards the end of that book that said, all over the country, women are gathering together on the new moons and the full moons to celebrate the goddess. And I was like, what? What? I have to find out more about this. And I did, and it went on from there.
Register for this summer's Masters of the Tarot Conference in Rhineback, New York, hosted by Mary Kay Greer and Rachel Pollack. For more information, check out mastersofthetarot.com. Links in the video description box.